Well, hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. Thank you for joining us on the Hot Zone today. We've got a very special guest, my friend Michele Bachmann, one-time presidential candidate and mom, and that's the most important part, obviously. And we met her, I don't know,
In
last year
Jerusalem.
sometime
In
here
Jerusalem.
in Jerusalem. Yeah, and so I just wanted to bring you on and kind of get your thoughts about how this war has gone. Obviously, a lot of the things that have happened are not things that anybody had on their bingo card, but uh, and there are probably more surprises to come. But what was the sense that you got when you came and visited here first? Uh, which was because you actually lived at the kibbutz Be'eri, didn't you? When you were
Yes. Yes.
like a college student or something?
Yeah. When I was a high schooler. So I was in
Oh,
high
wow.
school and I went to Israel to volunteer for a summer and we lived at Kibbutz Be'eri and we pulled weeds in cotton fields and cleaned pots in the kitchen and worked with kids in the nursery. So it was a wonderful experience. And it was right after the Yom Kippur War in the early 1970s. So Israel was a third world country then. I'm so grateful I had that baseline experience from about 1973, 74 because Israel was completely different. It was still in that building up phase, and it was just a pleasure to be there. Also, the other thing was just how different Gaza was, because as your listeners know from all your reporting, Gaza sits on Kibbutz Be'eri. It comes right up to the line of Kibbutz Be'eri.
Hmm.
And so when I was there, we would take an old school bus on our day off and just climb aboard and head over to Gaza, and we go over to the Mediterranean. And as a girl from Minnesota, I'd never body surfed before. And so we were body surfing in the Mediterranean. There were Gazans all around, and there was no trouble back then. That was before the radical ideology took hold, before Hamas, Fatah. It was just a completely
Hmm.
different world back then, and it shows the power of the embrace of a radical ideology to the point of death and extermination. It wasn't like that back in the early 70s.
That's amazing. And I wonder what lessons you can draw from that for the world we live in today, as we see America becoming more and more divided culturally and ideologically. What kind of how does it make you feel?
Well, I'm sitting in a seat of great hope. I'm the dean of the Graduate School of Government here at Regent University. Pat Robertson started this school almost 50 years ago. This is a very pro-Israel university because we're a pro-biblical university. We're very strong biblical worldview, and everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a frame of reference, and it depends on your frame of reference. It's how do you think? What are the premises that you hold to? People who hold to a biblical worldview tend to be people who seek peace and who seek to live at peace with all men. But
Hmm.
when you embrace a radical worldview, a view of a death cult like radical Islam, then all of your thoughts are captivated by how you can kill people who don't think like you do. That's not Christianity. That's not the hallmark of Christianity. That's the hallmark of the radical Islam point of view of thinking. So I'm so grateful because here we're teaching this next generation. We're handing off the baton, if you will, of biblical worldview thinking. And here at our government school, we decided to add a PhD program. We have undergrad, we have master's programs, we have a PhD program. We need credentialed people with a biblical worldview who can work in the Pentagon, in the Defense Department, who can work in all the areas of the State Department, our military academies, all across all levels of government, who have a realistic view of the world. The Bible has the most realistic view of mankind and the world, and certainly a pro Israel perspective. We don't have that many people. Higher education tends to be anti Semitic. You may have seen the article this morning. President Trump said that they're going to review Columbia University, which receives $5 billion in grants from the United States government because of their roots of anti Semitism, the world's oldest hatred. So here we're very
Hmm.
pro-Israel, but a lot of institutions of higher education are anti-Semitic, and they blackball people from their programs who are pro-Israel. So that's why I'm so grateful here. We're lighting a candle. We're not cursing the darkness. Like, for instance, today,
Hmm.
we're sponsoring a screening of the film called Tragic Awakening. We have a rabbi who's coming. It's a documentary. And so we also created the Israel Institute because we realize, even among evangelical Christians, we haven't done a good job of handing the baton of a biblical understanding of Israel to the next generation. So we're trying to equip the next generation with a biblical foundation and understanding regarding the Jewish people and the Jewish state, but we also want to equip the churches. So in their backyard, they can equip their young people. They can have Bible studies and excellent quality materials that they can trust so they can also hand off the baton. So we're doing that, and then in a couple weeks we're hosting U.S. Ambassador to the UN, or I'm sorry, Israeli Ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon. He will be here to speak to our students, and we're also hosting Christian philosopher Os Guinness, who's going to speak
Oh,
on Hebrew biblical roots of our faith, but also what Israel has done right for the world. So we want our students to know that. A lot of our students don't even think about who has rights to the land anymore. They ask a more simple question: is Israel even good for the world? So Os Guinness, this wonderful Christian philosopher, is going to come and address those questions. So we're being very intentional about teaching the next generation about Israel and what God's plan is through using the Jewish people and Israel and the blessing of the covenant that Israel represents in the Bible.
so I've been telling people lately on the podcast that if you want to think clearly about the news that we see going on around us, all of the mayhem and death and destruction and depravity that we see around us, you have to start with the moral perspective before you look at the political perspective or the economic perspective or anything like that. Would you agree with that statement? And
Yes.
how would you say it's important to do that in the case of this conflict in Israel?
Chuck, I'm so glad that you said that because Israel is what's right with the world. Remember, God chose Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants to be his people. It's God chose a people for his covenant, and then he put them in a land, Genesis 15:18. And when the people are in the land, the covenant blessing is that every single family on earth will be blessed. Well, why is that? Because God gave the law to Moses at Mount Sinai. That's when God and man met, when the Torah was given, the word of God was given at Mount Sinai. That has proved to be the greatest plan for living that the world has ever known. That which is laid out in the Bible by God that he then gave to Moses. God chose that people to be entrusted with the scriptures and then share that scripture with the rest of the earth. There is no better plan or makeup for living, and that basis, first of all, is foundational with faith, and from faith comes morality. And morality is what's right and what's wrong. The greatest ethics
Hmm.
ever transmitted to mankind are the ethics contained in the Torah scriptures that God gave to Moses. We try to teach that here at Regent University. Churches try to teach that. And the more we embrace that view of thinking, the better off people are, the better off the world is, the better and highest level of standard of living that the world can possibly have. You compare and contrast that with the lifestyle, for instance, in Gaza right now, or in countries that have embraced a completely different way of living. There is no justice. You don't find justice.
That's true.
It's a justice that is cruel. It's a lifestyle that's misery. It's a perversion of a way to live. And so you're exactly right. That's where it all begins. It isn't politics. Politics is downstream from culture, downstream
Hmm.
from morality. That all begins with what we believe. And that foundational belief system, the highest and best, is taken from the Torah, the scriptures that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai.
So there are a lot of people today in America who feel like uh, they're just tired of being They feel like we've been taken advantage of by many people around the world. Their taxes have been used for
Hmm.
absolutely profane and ridiculous things, and we're finding out more and more every day.
Yes.
And their answer to that is, you know what, we should just pull out. We should just not have anything to do with the war in Ukraine. We should have nothing to do with the war in Israel. We should stop paying for all these endless wars,
Yeah.
and just walk away essentially from the world. From a geopolitical standpoint, how do you feel about that, and what would your counsel be to Americans who feel that way?
Well, that's a great question. I'm a former member of the United States Congress, and I served on the Intelligence Committee. We dealt with the classified secrets of the nation. So I have real world experience with that, and I've traveled all over the world meeting with heads of state, kings, princes, parliaments, presidents, prime ministers. And what I've seen is this, is that America is a force for good in the world. America has been vilified and been expressed as a hated nation across the earth. That's exactly the opposite. We've been a force for good. However, there are those who have embedded themselves in the United States government who misused the American people's tax money in a profoundly horrific way. I'll give you one example. When during the first several weeks of Donald Trump's presidency, the DOGE, the government efficiency branch that is led by Elon Musk, they revealed that at USAID, at minimum, $9.6 billion went directly to fund terror organization like
Mm-hmm.
Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others. This is, I
Yep.
was physically sick when I read what some of the results were from DOGE. And one thing I saw as a member of Congress, the United States government has been so misused by a lot of people with what I would consider evil motives. We've actually funded both sides of almost every conflict for decades and decades and decades. This is sick. It's a betrayal of the American people. We're funding both the bad guys and the good guys. We've toppled regimes over and over again. We've been involved in areas where we had no business being involved. What I like right now about what the Trump administration is doing, I think that for the first time we're seeing a pulling back of the covers to what's happened, how we've been manipulated. We, the American people, have been manipulated with our money. And I think that what we're going to see is we're going to see America reduce the spending that we've given to evil organizations. But I don't see that we're necessarily going to completely pull out and stop the spending that we're doing for nations that are trying to do something positive. For instance, your best example would be Israel and the Iranian proxies in the circle of fire around Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So there's about 7, 8 nations around Israel that have been pounding the tar out of Israel. And so what did Donald Trump do just this last week with Secretary of State Rubio? They negotiated in excess of $3 billion in new armaments and weapons that Israel badly needs. Those will be fast tracked over to Israel. They need it just for their survival. And they're
Mm-hmm.
also a force for good because America has interests in the Middle East. And it's often been said that Israel is the best aircraft carrier that the United States could have. In other words, an aircraft carrier, Chuck, as you know more than anyone, it's 4 acres of projecting force anywhere in the world. And that's been one of America's chief calling cards of projecting power across the world to protect American interests. So Israel is like a forward operating base for America and our interests because America and Israel are very much aligned in our values. So I think that we will continue to fund Israel. I don't see that pulling back. In fact, it's just the opposite. I think President Trump is doing everything he can to equip them, but he's rightly pulling back for the U.S. funding terrorists and terror
Mm-hmm.
organizations. So he's trying to figure out where the funding is coming from for Hezbollah, Hamas, all of these organizations that keep shouting death to America, death to Israel. Should we be funding that? Absolutely not. So I think we're going to see a decrease. Hopefully that'll completely dry up. But what I see is the funding will continue where America's forces will be protected by a nation that's trustworthy like Israel.
This area is probably one of the most intractable, is probably the most intractable uh, cr- conflicts in the world, and has been for a long time, because you have two groups of people trying to inhabit the same space who are, I would say, mutually exclusive, except that's kind of one sided, because the Israelis would have no problem living with Palestinians as long as they quit trying to kill each other, kill the Israelis.
Well, and
But
remember,
the
20% of the population of Israel are Arabs. And
are
so
Arabs, right? And they live great here. They're in
they live
parliament.
great. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they serve in the
Mm-hmm.
Knesset. So those who live at peace and integrate, Israel has no problem with that. The problem are those that have vowed to annihilate the Jews and kill the
Mm-hmm.
Jews. That's a problem.
Well, and the difficulty is separating the two, because those are like butter and margarine mixed together in the Judea and Samaria, in Gaza. If there is anybody in those areas who's an Arab Palestinian who is not uh, anti antithetical to Israel, or not against Israel, they dare not say so,
No, you're
or they
right.
themselves
Or
are going
they're
to face
eliminated.
persecution.
That's right. They're
So,
eliminated.
so what do you do about this? I mean, of course, this is an age-old question that many people who are a lot smarter than me have been trying to solve for a long time. But this is the conversation that's happening over here among the Israelis when they're talking about what to do with the people in Gaza. Yeah, they essentially cannot stay there because they will not stop trying to kill Israelis. They just can't. Their
No,
whole worldview revolves around who they hate, is predicated on who they hate, rather than like in Israel, everything they do is about protecting those they love. But we know that that's not the case in the Judea and Samaria and Gaza, because those people would happily sacrifice their own family members, and we've seen it happen, to be able to kill another Israeli. And so you just cannot coexist with people like that. You can't try to reason with them. What do you do? How do they solve this problem?
well, we've seen actually a miraculous turn of the conversation just in the recent months with Donald Trump. And this really is a wonderful thing that is happening because in Gaza, which is west of modern day Israel, and maybe let me just back up for a second. I think we take our guidance again from the Bible because God Himself promised to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob his covenant land, which is Genesis 15:18. All of your viewers, open up your Bible and open it up to Genesis 15, go to verse 18, and God Himself describes the land that He's giving forever. There is no time limit. He's giving the land that He describes to Israel. What is that land? That's from the Mediterranean, that's parts of southern Lebanon, parts of southern Syria, what's now modern day Jordan, parts of Egypt, all of the area that we know of as Israel, Judea, Samaria, all of that is the land that it's eternally promised to Israel. So that is Israel's land. And in various conflicts, for instance, in the 1967 war, which was June 6, 1967, the Seven-Day War, that's when Israel took control of Gaza. They took control of Judea, Samaria. They took control of areas in the Sinai. So every time the Arab powers have attacked Israel, God's response has been supernatural. Israel has actually expanded their boundaries. And I think October 7th is no different. I think we're seeing an expansion of the boundaries. Many of your viewers saw when Donald Trump was in the Oval Office, he sat behind his desk, the Resolute desk, and he held up a black marker pen. And he said of that pen, take a look at just the cap on this pen. That's the size of Israel. Now take a look at the entire desktop of my desk. That's the rest of the Middle East. And he said, I think it'd be a good thing if Israel got bigger. In other words, he said, this isn't going to work. Just like you said, Chuck, this isn't going to work. How is Israel supposed to abide living next to assassins that want them dead? Because Gaza is Terroristan. Israel in
Mm-hmm.
2005 in August gave the land of of Gaza to the Gazans and said, have a nice life, basically, to the point where they even abandoned their houses, they abandoned their businesses, they dug up their dead, and they said, here, now have your Palestinian state, go for it. And instead, and plus the world gave them billions of dollars. And so what did they do with the billions of dollars? They built like 500 miles of concrete terror tunnels where people today are being suffered, and they're suffering, and they're being tortured, and they're being starved in those tunnels today, while the Gazans are eating in excess of 3,000 calories a day, and they have supplies in their warehouses that'll last them more than 6 months. It's all lies. It's all ridiculous. And the fact is, the money that we're sending over has paid to teach the children, this young generation, to live as terrorists. And so it is Terroristan, and what I mean by that in Gaza is that there's only one objective in that area and with those people, as to kill Jews, kill as many Jews as possible, kill as many Americans as possible. There is no respect for life. So you don't respect that kind of thinking. You don't respect those actions. They have lost the right to the land. When you are a terror state, you've lost the right to the land. And Donald Trump was exactly right. They need to be ejected from the land. So there's 2 million people or less living there. Now think of Ukraine. In Ukraine, it's been in excess of probably 11 million people who've been displaced in Ukraine. So where did those people go? They went to all sorts of places in Europe, America, other places, and they were absorbed. 2 million people is not a lot of people to absorb. That is possible. And remember, there's 56 other Arab countries. There's a lot of places and a lot of land where they could go. And of course, the Arabs don't want to take them. Why? This is a great question. Why don't the Arab people want to take them? It's because what the people in Gaza serve is as a bat. They're like a baseball bat. And the Arab nations use the Gazans as a baseball bat to the rest of the world. It's kind of like white guilt. And they say, oh, look at these poor, tread upon people. You have to give them more money, and you have to give us Arab nations more things because you white nations or you other nations are being so mean to these Gazans. Well, that's a lie. It's always been a lie. And so now finally the curtain is being pulled back, and the world is seeing this is a terror regime. And they only have one goal. And their end goal is we're going to kill every Jew, which will never happen. And we're going to take the land, which will never happen. Because why? The Bible says that land is Israel's forever. So never, ever, ever will this horrendous terroristic plan ever succeed in history. So the kindest thing that we could do is to be a part of an effort to relocate people who are filled with so much hate and evil that they would literally kill every Jewish baby that lives next door to them. And now it's time that they're exported. And as a matter of fact, all of the terrorist elements in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, they need to leave too. They need to leave, and they also need to be exported because this is Israel's rightful land. It's always been Israel's rightful land. In modern international law, just over 100 years ago, there was the San Remo Treaty, which reflected the end of World War I because all of the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and to the victor goes the spoils. And so the victorious nations after World War I decided we're going to set aside, according to Genesis 15:18. That's what the San Remo document says. We are going to set aside this land, Genesis 15:18, for the Jews. It's their homeland. And so that law stands today, international law. It was enshrined in the League of Nations and then adopted by the United Nations. So that law is still perfectly good international law today. So we should agree with international law that the Jews have the right to their land and support them, because that will bring the greatest peace in the Middle East. Adding one more Arab terror state will not add to peace. What we need to do is eject those who adopt terrorism. They need to go somewhere else. And then the Jews need to have the right to the land that God gave them, because it is their land. They won it fair and square in the San Remo Agreement under international law in 1948, in 1967, and now with the Gaza war.
Well, the United States has quite a bully pulpit, and we have a president now who is willing to employ that bully pulpit in a way that could potentially encourage, let's say, those other Arab nations to actually take some of those, because in reality, Jordan and Egypt couldn't survive without the help that they get from not just the United States, but also from Israel itself.
That's
Uh,
exactly
I
right.
was
They
When I
couldn't
was
get
in Jordan, they get a majority of their fresh water, for example,
that's right.
from Israel.
That's right.
So, with enough pressure applied, maybe some tariffs thrown in for good measure, do you think that that would get them to play ball with that?
Well, whether I don't know if they will be the ones to take them or not. They're adamant that they're not the ones. I don't think it really
Mm-hmm.
matters where they go, just as long as they leave, because you can't have a group of, it's just like after World War II with the Germans in Nazi Germany. They had to go through a denazification because their worldview, we started our conversation talking about worldview, mindset, in other words, their mindset was to hate the Jews in Germany, and
Mm-hmm.
they were anti-Semitic to the core. So the people had to go through an anti-Semitism training, and they had to be brainwashed out of how they've been brainwashed. In other words, kind of a reverse.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
same thing happened here. This is so deep, however, that I think they need to go somewhere else, whether it's Indonesia, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is some other area where Muslims are living. They just need to go somewhere else. And I think that if anyone can come up with a strategy of how to create incentives for another nation to take those people, that's what needs to happen. But the Arab world doesn't want to, this has been really positive for the Arab world to be able to use, they use and manipulate the people that live in Gaza. They have no problem
Mm-hmm.
with the people in Gaza living in squalor, having miserable lives. They could care less. They call these people refugees, the longest refugees ever in the history of the world. They're being used to benefit other Arab nations. So, I mean, this is really a bad game. This is a horrible game that's been used, and the Gaza people have been willing to go along with it. But it's time for this to end, and it's time for Israel to finally live in peace. If there's anything with October 7th that we know, it's that the people who, the terrorists that are living in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza are never going to give up their belief system. It's not going to happen. Even today, in excess of 70 to 80% of the people that live in Judea, Samaria, who are Arab and who are Arab in Gaza, say that October 7th was a great thing. We think it's great
Mm-hmm.
those little Jewish babies were strangled to death and the young mother was strangled. This is beyond any sensibility. So we can't imagine teaching our children to hate. We teach our little children, be kind and good in everything you say and do. Love all people. That's a biblical way of thinking. That is not the way of thinking in the Arab terrorist nation. And so we need to accept reality, which Donald Trump has done. And so he's come up with the best idea there is, and that is eject the terrorists that are living in Gaza. They've given up the right to the land. And also, don't forget, when the famous press conference happened at the White House between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, what effectively Donald Trump was saying to the public is that Israel won this war with Hamas and
Mm-hmm.
Hamas lost. That's what he was
Mm-hmm.
saying. And so when you conclude a war, again, to the victor goes the spoils. So Israel won the war, so they have the right to the land, and the people will
Yeah.
go somewhere else where they'll have a better life. That's what Donald Trump is proposing, where they'll have a better life, but they've lost all right to that land. They lost the war, they've lost the right to the land. This is a very unique set of circumstances, and they need to go. And just like in Judea, Samaria, where Israel has cleared out about 40,000 terrorists out of Jenin and some of the other Arab cities, the terrorists need to be cleared out of Judea, Samaria, because this is enough. The Jewish people should no longer have to be subjected to terrorists. And an analogy is here in the United States. Donald Trump has been very clear. He put out a tweet this morning and yesterday. We won't put up with this on American campuses anymore. So the allies and supporters of Hamas, which is a foreign designated terrorist organization, if you're there marching in favor of a terrorist organization, you're gone. If you're foreign born, you're going to be deported. If you're American born, you're probably going to be jailed, and rightly so, because we're going to have self preservation and we're going to protect American interests. For too long, our tax dollars and our policy has been anti American, and now Donald Trump is implementing pro American policies. We need to support him. And tonight is the State of the Union address in America. And I think we'll see Donald Trump reiterating the points that you and I have just been talking about, Chuck.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Michele, for coming on with us. Really appreciate your insights in this and taking some time for the hot zone. Everybody, I'm sure, is going to be just uh, very grateful for you taking the time to spend with us. So, if is if people wanted to follow your, do you have a presence online where people can follow you?
Well, I'm at Regent University and my name is Michele Bachmann. So just go to regent.edu and type in Michele Bachmann and you'll get to the Robertson School of Government and the Israel Institute. And I'd be honored and delighted to communicate with anyone who wants to contact us. We want to invite people to come and be a part of our school. You can be a part of this school online. You don't have to live here. So we invite people to come for undergraduate studies, master's, PhD. You can study about Israel, but also at the Israel Institute as well. And I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to be with you, Chuck. You've done a tremendous service all over the world, going into one war zone after another to report so that people know what truly is happening on the ground. We don't have to go to fake media, fake news to know what's going on. We can go to you. You're a trusted source for information. So I'm so grateful that you let me have this conversation with you today.
Thank you, and thank you for what you're doing at Regent as well. Since my daughter Amy and her husband Mark are students there, and I know they love it. They just think it's the best place they could have gone. So
Fantastic.
appreciate the work you're doing, and God bless you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Chuck. You take care.
All right.